I want to talk to you today about something that's really exciting to me called social acupuncture. And the reason it's exciting to me is because it's a way to empower each one of you who's watching this today to go out further and to further multiply the efforts that you're doing, because we need to be able to maximize our effect. Now, when we're looking at humanitarianism, we often think of it as somebody who's doling out the cash or somebody who's in the crowd going, we need to pay attention to this. But what we often don't pay attention to is that way we spend our money is one very important thing, being conscious of how we're not buying something that's produced in a sweatshop or something like that, but how we make our money is as important as how we spend it. I learned this in a very, very intimate way when I was negotiating the first treaty in 300 years between the Hopi and Navajo Nations. I was feeling so good about myself because we had managed to get these people together. They had actually just had some teenagers from one tribe beat up on some 80-something-year-olds in another tribe. It was right at each other's throats. We succeeded. It all had to do with the coal being slurried and the water underground. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, now we got them all on the same plate. We can address this issue. I come home feeling so good. I just finished my bachelor degree in business. I open it up in my trust so I can actually read it for the first time. And right there, I realized I was actually profiting from one of the companies that had been slurring the coal. And suddenly I realized I actually felt like I had blood on my hands. And it was such a real come to Jesus moment for me, because it suddenly was very clear. There wasn't enough that I was out there being an activist, and it wasn't enough that I was out there trying to get other people to pay attention and help them get their words out and their concerns out. I need to make sure I wasn't contributing to the problem. So when we talk about who are the greatest threats to society today, one thing I want to inform you about is a man by the name of Victor Lebow. After World War II, the United States wanted to kind of find a way to rebuild. They were saying, how can we get out of the Depression? Well, Victor Lebow came forward and said, I have a great idea. Well, all we have to do is we have to get people together to start making how we consume our value system. How much we're putting into the economic thing has to be how we value each other. People have bought it. It worked well. They very naively thought, oh, we'll just do this for a few decades and then we'll revert back to the old traditional things of being responsible with our resources. But it was rather naive, because how do you undo a whole generation that's been trained sociologically to think a certain way? Obviously you don't. So we had all these old thought processes, which we could kind of squinch by if we did it. But when you start looking at globalization and how that threw this concept around the world, well, suddenly it's not such a good thing. I think it's very important that we need to look at the fact that globalization by itself is a natural thing from having an increasing population, being able to be in touch with each other, being able to move. And, I can't even go to the store without buying, seeing a chirimoya from here, or going and getting a piece of clothing that's been made somewhere in India. I mean, that's our new reality. And it can be a good thing if we handle it responsibly. So how do we do that? We do that by helping people achieve and understand how their personal, local, national, and international webs of influence each other. These are just some examples of how we've done that. I'm going to just explain one in the interest of time. The one on the far left is Irma Cervantes. She is a Western trained nurse, one of the top of what she does. But she's also a traditionally trained Toltec medicine woman. And in the region of the Dallas area, they were hosting what was called the Binational Health Symposium. They had doctors from Canada, doctors from the United States. They were all having a problem because they were receiving all these new immigrants that were coming in, and they were treating themselves traditionally, but they couldn't actually, figure out why things weren't working with the regular Western medicine. Well, it's all chemistry. Both traditional medicine, Western medicine. Sometimes chemistry doesn't mix with chemistry. So we had all these doctors and nurses learning from this traditional medicine woman. Not only did it make a profound difference where these doctors and nurses came forward and said, now we actually have medicine that we can give someone who can't even, who's allergic to the regular Western medicine to alleviate pain during childbirth, etc. But we also had leaders of the Choctaw Nation come forward and say, thank you. Now the people in our own backyard will see value in what we're doing. So it ended up permeating further. Thank you. I want to give an example. This man that you see right here is Father William Wasson. And I am definitely an example of what it means to be benefiting from someone who strategizes to make a kind of difference. I was born in Mexico City, I was adopted, and I have a hearing loss. The fact that you hear me say to you, hello, my name is Mary Ann, instead of I am, is because I can actually speak what I do not hear. And that came around because I was given access to modalities like this. People would put their gloves, rubber gloves, and shape my tongue so I can say crown and crayon, even though I can't hear it. If I had stayed here in Mexico and lived, on the street, I probably would have been one of these many children, and no one would have known that I actually have the intelligence that I do or the ideas that I do. And I wanted to share that with you because this gives you kind of a perspective. The difference between my living my life out like that and not being able to actually speak or read lips or be able to communicate or hear was because someone made that investment. And that's the difference between me probably be starving somewhere and speaking here at TED. That is what it means. If you can actually make that one difference, and not just one person, but multiply it. So just like dropping a drop in water and you see the ripples come out, you end up seeing how those ripples affect. Now, through the Memnosyne Institute, these are pictures in New Zealand and Japan and Dallas, Texas, here with Voxelage Maya, one of our projects. Thousands of people have been helped because I was actually helped by someone that actually had the know-how to make the plan that he did. I've spoken at the United Nations, and again, I want to put this in perspective because when you go out here on the beach, you see children trying to sell bracelets. The difference between a child doing that and my being able to speak at the UN is because someone believed in me. So Father William Wasson, he managed to do this because he took regular modalities that had previously only been put to for-profit in terms of the same things that 7-Eleven does with franchises. He applied that actually to making these orphanages go around the world. Meanwhile, my father and my grandfather, John Thompson and Josie Thompson, they were best friends of his, and they ended up taking his idea for nonprofit initiatives, and they applied it to 7-Eleven, and they ended up coming up with ideas for profit sharing and ideas such as they were the first ones to put a jar in a 7-Eleven, collect the change, and then say to the public, we're going to match what you end up donating, so they end up collaborating with the public. So when people talk about mixing for-profit and nonprofit idealisms, it's not something new. This has been done. We may have new ideas of conscious capitalism. We may have new ideas, we call it social responsible investing, but this has been done before and it's proven. This was a quote that my father was fond of saying. CEOs are given positions of power that are conducive to leaders of a small country. Therefore, we are responsible to make all decisions with people in mind and not just with the numbers they represent to us. But that's not just CEOs anymore. If you are in this room today and you have access to the internet, you probably have more capability to communicate to the world and to find information that you want than a CEO in the 1960s did. What does that mean? It means we are the first generation to have no excuse for ignorance. We can't go and purchase something, do something, make any kind of action on our part and plead ignorance. We just can plead laziness, but we can't plead ignorance. So what does this mean? How do we react to that huge burden of responsibility? Well, we start looking at how things are interconnected. We understand, people are all about the environment, but you can't talk about the environment without talking about economics. And you get into economics, you get into human rights. Human rights makes you understand human diversity, religion, all sorts of race issues. Suddenly, you've gone all around. So I'm going to go through and identify. These are a couple of the ways that you can handle this responsibility yourself. If there's a web, if you think of a spider web, map out your choices. You have a cultural influence, you have a religious influence, you have a political influence, an economic influence, an environmental influence, human rights, social influence. Every one of us has this influence in our day-to-day decisions. If you map out how you're accumulating your wealth and you map out your means for positive impact, you'll find there's a place where they interconnect. Identify that, and you will do amazing things. The other thing to take a look at is look at the systems around you. Sometimes we want to address one thing, but we end up not looking at how the systems are interconnected. If we map out how a system's interconnected, the solution will fit. Be willing to turn a potential competition into a realized collaboration. I know everybody likes to say that, nature means that we're always competing. Well, nature also means that you're collaborating. There are many examples in nature that demonstrate this. The last thing is measure both ways. The public is going to start looking at it from, is it making some tangible difference in my backyard? And you're going to probably look at things from, what does it mean to me personally? I understand people are looking at it from two different directions. So when you look at it this way, we're in the business of making leaders. Each one of us is making leaders of the people that we're serving, especially if we want to get them off the same hamster wheel. I want to also share this quote with you because this is the new reality as well. If you took all the for-profit money in the world and you took all the private money held in somebody's pocket and then you took all the nonprofit money and all the money from the countries, guess what? It doesn't even compare. But if you get to the amount of money that's necessary to address the world's issues, we're going to have to tap into some of that for-profit money, some of that private money, which means we have to open our ideas, our minds. This is a picture of my father and me, and the reason why I wanted to show it to you is because at that age, it was actually just before I took this trip with him, I had an amazing experience with him where he came home and he had this big stack of papers and it was showing all these numbers, everything from like 5 cents up to about $20, and the other thing had countries. And I asked him, what is this for? And he looked at me and he said, well, my shareholders said we need to manufacture something for about $7.50 a day. And so I'm just going to go to who's asking for that. And being a little kid, as you can see, I just said, well, why don't you go to the people asking for 5 cents, give them the $7.50, their shareholders have already approved, change people's lives, and then you're fine. Then I just went on my way. My father came back and said, thank you for reminding me what my real job in this world is. And I forgot all about that until I was in high school, and he came back to me and he said, remember that? They built roads, they built schools, they built all sorts of new things. And they didn't do it because of charity, they did it because we were responsible. So what are some ways that we can do this ourselves? This is an example called Cafe Momentum. It's a for-profit restaurant in Dallas. This gentleman, this wonderful chef, he takes in kids that are nonviolent sex offenders. He brings them in. He trains them to do every single job in the restaurant. They're all given $10 an hour. All the tips go to keep making it work. Every single one of them has come off the street, is living an incredible life, and actually goes out with a resume that they wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. This is an idea of something I'm actually working with some people to create, the idea of a micro-mutual fund, such as when you're here in Tulum, you probably are aware that this is one of the wealthiest areas in Mexico in terms of the money being made. It's also the area of Mexico that has some of the poorest people. So how do you make that happen? If we do a micro-mutual fund, we can actually create a fund where individuals can put aside a set of money so that there's a percentage that people could put in $5, $10. It adds up, and they can be given the same kind of opportunities that the ultra-wealthy have. Another project we're doing is a school out of a box. Don't worry about reading all the details, but what the purpose is to try and take that same idea of scalable strategy to bring education to the world. So, in conclusion, social acupuncture is really looking at the fact that humanitarianism needs to looks at alleviating a symptom, but they don't look at the full causes of it. Whereas with social acupuncture, we're trying to look at just the way acupuncture does on the body. How are things that are connected? How can we strategize that accordingly? And that's how we make the difference. So I want to thank you for taking this time and listening to me. And I want to challenge every single one of you, whatever you're doing in your life, however you're going about it, think about how your impact can be maximized. Think about whatever you're doing, even if you're not thinking about trying to make an impact, you're just thinking about trying to survive, how to make an investment. If you take that opportunity, you will make that difference in the world for somebody else, just like me. Thank you.